My mother has called me exactly twice in 30 years at an ungodly hour of the night. The first time, my father had a stroke. The second time, she said 7 words. Just 7 words. And I want you to really hear this, because when I replay that call in my head even now, standing in my kitchen, perfectly safe, perfectly fine, my hands still shake. She said, "Nathaniel, don't come home. They're watching." Then the line went dead. I was on a flight to Portland in 53 minutes. My mother called me at 3 a.m. and said only one sentence. I was on a flight home within the hour. Before I go any further, drop your city name in the comments right now and subscribe. I need you present for this. Because this story, it could have happened on your street. My name is Nathaniel Cross. Nat, to everyone who actually knows me. I'm 41 years old. I work in supply chain logistics, which means I spend roughly 230 days a year in cities that aren't my own, sleeping in hotel rooms that all smell faintly of someone else's cologne, eating room service pasta at 11 p.m., and checking in with my mother via text every Sunday morning without fail. That was our deal. Sunday texts, birthday calls, Christmas in person. That was the whole contract between us, and it had worked perfectly for 16 years since I left Portland, Oregon, and moved to Chicago for work. My mother, Dorothy Cross, to literally everyone including the mailman, is not a dramatic woman. She is the opposite of dramatic. She is the kind of woman who, when a pipe burst in her kitchen ceiling and flooded her entire ground floor, called a plumber before she called me. She handled it. She paid the invoice. She texted me a photo of the repaired ceiling 3 days later with the caption, "All sorted." How's Chicago? That is my mother. She does not panic. She does not catastrophize. She does not call at 3 a.m. My father, Gerald Cross, passed away 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast and it was brutal, and we barely had 8 weeks between diagnosis and funeral. After he died, my mother stayed in their house, the house I grew up in, the house on Cavender Street in Northeast Portland, because she said leaving would feel like erasing him. She kept his reading chair by the window. She kept his coffee mug on the second hook. She kept his side of the closet exactly as he left it for almost 2 years before she quietly donated his clothes to a veterans charity and didn't mention it until I noticed on Christmas. She handled grief the same way she handled everything else. Quietly, privately, without asking for help. So when my phone lit up at 3:07 a.m. on a Tuesday in February and her name appeared on the screen, I felt it in my stomach before I even answered. Something was wrong. Not just wrong, catastrophically wrong. Because my mother does not call at 3 a.m. I grabbed the phone on the second ring. I sleep light. Always have. Occupational hazard of too many years in too many time zones. Mom. Silence first. 2 full seconds of silence. And in those 2 seconds I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp, and pressed the phone so hard against my ear I could hear my own pulse. Then her voice came through. And hey-race the thing. Hey-race what I've never been able to fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. It wasn't the words that frightened me first. It was the tone. My mother's voice has always had a particular quality to it. Warm. Unhurried. The kind of voice that read me to sleep every night until I was 8, and still somehow makes me feel like I'm 8 when I hear it over the phone. Even after my dad died, even in her worst moments of grief, her voice retained that quality. What came through the phone at 3:07 a.m. was not that voice. It was flat. Controlled. The way someone speaks when they are working very hard to not make a sound. Nathaniel. She never calls me Nathaniel. Don't come home. They're watching. Click. Dead air. I called back immediately. 3 times in a row. Straight to voicemail. Not even ringing, straight to voicemail, which meant either her phone was off, or the call was being dropped, or... I stopped that thought. I got out of bed. I am a logical man. I work in data and systems and supply chains. My brain is built for problem solving, not spiraling. So I stood in the middle of my Chicago apartment at 3:09 a.m., and I tried to think rationally. Option 1. My mother had a nightmare and called me half asleep. Possible. Unlikely. She has never once in my memory called anyone in her sleep. Option 2. Medical emergency. Stroke, confusion, disorientation. Possible. The flat tone could be neurological. But she'd formed a coherent sentence. A very specific, deliberate sentence. Option 3, she was in danger. Someone was in that house or near that house. Or watching that house, and she had found a 30-second window to call me and warn me away. Don't come home. They're watching. Why would she warn me away? If she needed help, If she was scared, wouldn't she tell me to come? Unless coming would put me in danger too. Unless whatever was happening on Cavender Street was bad enough that her instinct wasn't save me but stay away. I booked the flight at 3:14 a.m. I was in a cab at 3:21. I know she said don't come. I know. But she's my mother. The flight from O'Hare to Portland was 2 hours and 48 minutes. I spent approximately 40 minutes of that trying to sleep, failing completely, and the remaining 2 hours and 8 minutes making a mental list of every person I could contact when I landed. My mother's next-door neighbor on the left, Pauline Okafor. Retired school principal. 73 years old. Sharp as a tack and nosier than any human being I have ever encountered. Which I meant as a genuine compliment in this situation. Pauline knew everything that happened on Cavender Street. She knew when packages were delivered. She knew when someone's teenager came home past curfew. She had opinions about everyone's lawn maintenance, and she shared those opinions freely. If something had been happening near my mother's house, Pauline knew my mother's neighbor on the right, an older gentleman named Walt Briggs who had moved in about 14 months ago after the Hendersons sold up and relocated to Arizona. I had met Walt exactly once at Christmas when ID helped him carry a box from his car. Pleasant enough. Kept to himself. My mother had mentioned him a couple of times in passing, said he was quiet, polite, that had helped her carry groceries once when her wrist was acting up. Nothing alarming. Nothing memorable. And then there was Rhonda McKay. Rhonda was my mother's closest friend in the neighborhood, had been for nearly 20 years. They walked together on Wednesday mornings. They had a standing coffee date on the first Saturday of every month. Rhonda had held my mother's hand at my father's funeral. If my mother had confided in anyone, it was Rhonda. I landed in Portland at 6:44 a.m. local time. I did not go to Cavender Street. I know that's the first instinct. Go straight there, knock on the door, see with your own eyes. But don't come home was echoing in a loop in my skull, and I decided that walking into whatever was happening blind and alone was not the move. So I drove my rental car to a diner 6 blocks from my mother's street, ordered a black coffee I didn't touch, and called Rhonda McKay. She answered on the first ring. Nat. Her voice was strange. Not surprised, strained. Like she'd been waiting for the call. You're here, aren't you? You got on a plane. I am 6 blocks away. Rhonda, what is going on? A long pause. How much has your mother told you? 7 words. That's all I've got. 7 words at 3 in the morning. Another pause. Longer. And then, come to my house. Not Cavender Street. My house. Oh, put coffee on. She lived 4 streets over. I was there in 8 minutes. Rhonda McKay opened her front door before ID even made it up the porch steps, which told me she'd been watching for me from the window. She was still in her dressing gown, hair unbrushed, and she looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She ushered me inside, checked the street both ways before closing the door, and I watched her turn the deadbolt. At 7 in the morning, in a quiet residential neighborhood, she turned the deadbolt, and then she looked at me and she said, Nat, this has been going on for 3 weeks. And your mother made me promise not to tell you. 3 weeks. My mother had been dealing with something for 3 weeks and had not said a single word to me. Not in our Sunday texts. And when she came back from grocery shopping on Sunday afternoon, and it was still parked in exactly the same spot, she mentioned it to Rhonda on their Monday coffee. Rhonda had driven past Cavender Street that same afternoon and confirmed it. Dark gray sedan. No movement. Windows slightly tinted. She hadn't been able to make out a license plate clearly. The angle was wrong, but she had noted it was an Oregon plate. My mother had knocked on a few neighbors' doors. No one claimed the car. On day 9, my mother had called the non-emergency police line. An officer had come out, run the plate, and told her the vehicle was registered and not stolen. Head said there was nothing he could do. Parking on a public street wasn't illegal, but that Head noted her concern and would ask a patrol car to do occasional drive-bys. The car disappeared for 2 days after the police visit. My mother had thought that was the end of it. Then it came back, and this time she told Rhonda it was different. Because the second time the car appeared, my mother started noticing other things. A man she didn't recognize standing at the end of the street, who seemed to be looking at her house. Not loitering, not obviously suspicious, just standing. She'd seen him twice in 4 days. Medium height, dark jacket, she couldn't make out his face clearly. Her motion sensor porch light, which my father had installed years ago and which had worked perfectly ever since, had started triggering at night. 2, 3, 4 times between midnight and 5 a.m. Shed looked out the window each time and seen nothing. No animals, no visible movement. Just the light blazing on and then cutting off again 60 seconds later. And then, 8 days ago, Nat Rhonda set down her mug. 8 days ago, your mother came to my door at 9 o'clock at night. No coat on, just her cardigan. She was shaking. I felt my jaw tighten. What happened? She said Shed found something in her back garden. Near the fence line. By the hydrangeas your dad planted. Found what? Rhonda looked at me. A small device. Black. About the size of a matchbox. Shed found it tucked in between the fence posts, half hidden under the leaves. The room went very quiet. A camera, I said. Rhonda nodded. A camera, she confirmed. Motion activated, from what the tech repair boy at the shop told her. Shed taken it in the next morning, in a plastic bag, just to find out what it was. He confirmed it. Wireless. Battery powered. Had been there long enough that the battery was at about 40%. My mother had found a hidden camera in her garden, pointed at her back door. And she had not told me. Because, as Rhonda explained quietly, my mother hadn't wanted me to worry. Hadn't wanted me to drop everything and come flying home. Hadn't wanted to be the reason I disrupted my life. She'd taken the camera to the police station herself. Filed a report. And then gone home and said nothing to me. Rhonda. My voice came out lower than I intended. Where is she right now? She's home. As far as I know, she's home. She texted me last night at 11 to say goodnight, which she always does. But Nat, that was before whatever happened at 3 a.m. I was already standing up. I have to go to her. She told you not to come. I know what she told me that I drove to Cavender Street slowly. Not because I was being cautious, though I was, but because the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had, and somehow that made everything worse. Same mature trees lining the footpath. Same mix of well-kept bungalows and 2 stories. Same slightly cracked pavement in front of the Okafor house that the city had been promising to fix since approximately the Obama administration. Everything looked completely, absolutely, deceptively normal. There was no dark gray sedan on the street. I parked 2 houses down, the way you do when you're not quite ready to arrive. And I sat in the rental car and looked at my mother's house. The lights were on downstairs. Living room and kitchen. At 7:30 in the morning that was normal. She was an early riser, always had been, up by 6 and coffee made before the news came on. The porch light was off. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked wrong. I got out of the car. Pauline Okafor's front door opened before I'd taken 3 steps. Nathaniel Cross. She was standing in her doorway in a floor-length house coat, arms folded, expression unreadable. Your mother is going to have my hide when she finds out I watched you park. Morning, Pauline. I crossed the few steps between the houses. Talk to me. She studied me for a moment. Then she stepped back and held the door open. 2 minutes, she said. Then you go to your mother. Inside, standing in Pauline's immaculate front hallway, she told me what she'd seen. Last night, Monday night, at approximately 11:45 p.m., Pauline had been awake. She didn't sleep well. She said, hadn't since her husband passed 4 years ago. She'd been in her front room with the lamp on, reading, when she'd seen headlights. Not unusual. Cars came down Cavender Street, at all hours. What was unusual was that this car had stopped. Not parked, stopped. In the middle of the street. And sat there, engine idling, for what Pauline estimated was 3 to 4 minutes. She'd moved to the window. The car was a dark sedan. The headlights cut off. But the engine kept running. Pauline had watched. She was not, she informed me, a woman who frightened easily. After 3 or 4 minutes, the car had moved on. Slow. Too slow. Down to the end of the street and around the corner. But Nathaniel, she said, before it moved, I saw someone standing on the pavement. Between that car and your mother's front gate. Just standing there. I couldn't see a face. Dark clothing. They stood there for maybe a minute, and then they got back in the car. Did you call the police? I called your mother. I blinked. You called her at midnight? I called her at 11:52, yes. She answered on the 3rd ring. She sounded wide awake. I don't think she'd been sleeping at all. I told her what I'd seen. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, Pauline paused, and for the first time her composure flickered, just briefly. She said, Pauline, I think they know I gave the camera to the police. The hairs on my arms stood up. And then she said, don't tell Nathaniel. I don't want him coming here. My mother opened the front door before I reached the porch. She stood in the doorway in her blue cardigan, the one with the slightly frayed left cuff she'd been meaning to replace for 2 years, and she looked at me with an expression I had never once seen on her face before. Not fear. My mother does not do fear. Relief. Pure, flooding, undisguised relief. And then immediately behind the relief, irritation. I told you not to come, she said. Hi, Mom. Good to see you too. She stepped aside to let me in. I hugged her first, properly, both arms, the way you hug someone when you've spent 4 hours on a plane not knowing if they were okay. She held on longer than she usually did. That told me more than anything else she could have said. Inside, the house smelled exactly as it always had. Coffee and the particular faint cedar scent of the closet by the front door. My father's reading chair was still by the window. His second coffee mug was still on the hook. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table. The same table where Shed helped me with homework and later sent me off to college. And she made coffee, and then she sat across from me and told me everything. Not just what Shed told Rhonda. Everything. The full version. It started, she said, not 22 days ago. It started 6 weeks ago. With a letter. The letter had come in the regular mail. No return address. Portland postmark. Her name and address printed, not handwritten. On a plain white envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Printed text. No signature. It said, "You don't know what your husband knew, but they think you do. Be careful who you trust." My mother had stared at that letter for a very long time. Then Shed done what my mother does. Shed folded it carefully, put it in a Ziploc bag, and placed it in the drawer under the telephone. And Shed started thinking. My father had worked for the same civil engineering consultancy for 27 years. Head managed infrastructure contracts, bridges, drainage systems, public works projects across Oregon, and occasionally into Washington state. It was, as far as I had ever understood, a thoroughly unglamorous profession. My father had been a methodical, modest man who talked about his work the way people talk about things they find satisfying but not thrilling. He had never, in my memory, mentioned anything concerning, anything unusual. But, after she received the letter, my mother had done something I hadn't known about. She had gone into my father's home office, the small room off the hallway that Shed kept exactly as he left it, the same way Shed kept his chair and his mug, and she had gone through his files. The paper files. The ones in the locked cabinet, the key to which had been on his keyring, which she still kept in the kitchen drawer with the spare batteries and the expired coupons. Shed spent 3 days going through everything. Most of it was exactly what Shed expected. Old project documents. Invoices. Correspondence. The administrative detritus of a long career in infrastructure. But in the back of the bottom drawer, in a manila envelope that had been taped shut, and then the tape had been peeled back and retaped, she found something. A USB drive. And a handwritten note in my father's handwriting that said, "If you're reading this, I wasn't careful enough. Call Dennis Waverly. No one else." My mother looked at me across the kitchen table. "Dennis Waverly," I said. "Who is Dennis Waverly?" "I had no idea," she said. "I had never heard your father mention that name once in 34 years of marriage. My mother is not an impulsive woman, but she is a thorough one." Shed spent 3 days trying to find Dennis Waverly before the gray sedan appeared on the street. What she found was this. Dennis Waverly had been a project auditor, an independent contractor who'd worked across several state infrastructure projects in Oregon in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The same period when my father's consultancy had been at its busiest. The period when they'd worked on a series of large public works contracts across 3 counties. There was very little about Waverly online. An old professional directory listing. A brief mention in a county government procurement document from 2003. And one more thing. An obituary. Dennis Waverly had died 4 years ago. 8 months, as it happened, after my father's diagnosis. 2 months before my father passed. The obituary listed no cause of death. It noted he was survived by a daughter in Seattle. And it had been published in a small county paper in southern Oregon. Not Portland. Not where Head apparently lived and worked for most of his career. My mother had hit a dead end. Shed put the USB drive and the note back in the envelope. Put the envelope in the drawer with the letter. And Shed said nothing to me. Then the camera appeared in her garden. "Mom." I kept my voice very level. "The USB drive. Do you still have it?" "Yes." "Have you looked at what's on it?" She met my eyes. "No," she said. "Because the note said to call Dennis Waverly. And Dennis Waverly is dead. So I didn't know what to do with it. And I was afraid." This was the first time in my entire life I had heard my mother use that word about herself. Afraid. "Okay," I said. "Okay. Where is it?" She stood up and went to the hallway. I heard the kitchen drawer open. She came back with a small Ziploc bag containing a black USB drive and a folded piece of paper. I looked at my father's handwriting. If you're reading this, I wasn't careful enough. Call Dennis Waverly. No one else. I thought about my father. Gerald Cross. Methodical. Modest. Unfailingly honest man. Spent 27 years in civil engineering and came home every night and read in his chair by the window and never once suggested there was anything about his work that warranted a hidden note and a sealed USB drive. I thought about what it took for a man like that to write those words. I wasn't careful enough. What had he known? What had he seen? And who, 3 years after his death, was still watching this house because they thought my mother knew too. I took the USB drive. We're not opening this here, I said. We're not doing anything here. You're going to pack a bag. You're going to tell Rhonda you're visiting me in Chicago. Loudly in a phone call. Because I want anyone listening to hear it. And we're going somewhere else to figure out what's on this drive. My mother looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll pack light," she said. We drove to a hotel near the airport. Nothing fancy. Paid cash for 2 rooms. Yes, I know, very spy movie, but when you have a hidden camera situation and an anonymous threatening letter, cash starts to feel appropriate. I borrowed a laptop from the business center. My mother sat in the chair by the window. Old habit, I suppose, choosing the chair by the window, and I inserted the USB drive. It took a moment to load. There were 11 files, 8 of them were PDFs. The remaining 3 were spreadsheets. I opened the first PDF. It was a procurement document. A county infrastructure contract from 2001. Standard format, project description, contractor details, timeline, budget. I skimmed it. Moved to the second. Another procurement document. Different project, same county, 2002. Third PDF. I stopped. This one was different. It was an internal memo, not an official document, not a public record. It was addressed to 3 names I didn't recognize and copied to a 4th name I did. Gerald Cross. My father had been copied on an internal memo discussing a discrepancy in materials reporting on a major county bridge project. The memo noted that the steel grade specified in the contract was not the steel grade that had been installed. The difference was significant, not a minor substitution, but a fundamental downgrade in structural integrity. The memo was dated March 2002. I opened the next file. Another memo. This one from my father. Addressed to the same 3 names. Dated 2 weeks later. It laid out, in my father's precise and methodical language, a detailed account of what had found. Not just the bridge project, 3 projects. 3 separate infrastructure contracts across the county in which materials had been substituted and the documentation had been falsified to show the correct materials had been used. He had named names, contractors, a county procurement officer, and one name that appeared across all 3 projects. A state-level official in the Infrastructure Oversight Division. My father had documented corruption. Systematic, deliberate, dangerous corruption. The kind that saved the contractors and their connected officials millions of dollars and left the public using infrastructure built to lower standards than they'd paid for and been promised. Had documented it in 2002. I looked at the remaining files. There were follow-up memos. Evidence of him raising it internally. A response from his firm's senior partner. Carefully worded, non-committal, clearly designed to discourage him from taking it further without explicitly saying so. And then a gap of several years. And then one final document, dated 2019, 4 years before my father's diagnosis. It was a letter, addressed to Dennis Waverly. My father had found Waverly, the independent auditor, and had shared everything with him. The letter confirmed that Waverly had agreed to help build a formal case. That they'd been quietly gathering additional evidence. That they believed they had enough to bring to a federal infrastructure oversight body. The letter ended with my father writing, "I know this has taken too long. I know the right thing should have been done in 2002. I should have been braver sooner. But I intend to see this through now, whatever it costs." Dennis Waverly died 18 months after this letter was written. My father was diagnosed 2 months later. I sat back in the hotel chair. My mother was watching me. "Dad knew," I said. My voice came out quiet. Had known for years. About the contracts. About the corruption. Had tried to report it internally, it went nowhere. So he found an auditor. They were building a case together. And then Waverly died and Dad got sick and whoever they were investigating, my mother said, very quietly, decided to find out if there was anything left behind. The gray sedan. The man standing outside. The camera and the hydrangeas. They weren't threatening her. They were looking for something. They thought she had whatever Waverly and my father had been compiling. They were watching to see if she accessed it. Talked about it. Shared it. My mother had found it and not known what it was, and her instinct to protect me had inadvertently protected the evidence too. And when Shed handed that camera in to the police, they'd realized